For the second consecutive season, the Washington Huskies meet the Texas Longhorns in a bowl game. Except this time, there's just a little bit more at stake.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Man, we couldn't have two more distinctly different flavors of college football ice cream on New Year's Day in these two semifinal matchups. If you're more into physicality, you're more into defense, traditional old school type of football, then maybe the Rose Bowl between Michigan and Alabama is more your taste. But if you're more into high-flying offense, great quarterbacks, even better wide receivers, explosive and big plays, not a lot of defense, well, maybe the Sugar Bowl is more your taste. Everybody and their mother, everybody and their brother is saying this is going to be a track meet. There are going to be points. And that is true because there are NFL players all across both the Longhorns and the Huskies offenses. And we are going to talk about the explosiveness of both Texas and Washington. But there's a matchup that really intrigues me. There's a matchup that I believe could sway this game one way or another and could determine whether the Huskies or the Horns make it to Houston. And it doesn't involve quarterbacks, doesn't involve wide receivers, doesn't involve tight ends, doesn't involve running backs. It involves the big boys up front. Emphasize big, especially for this defensive duo up front for the Texas Longhorns. Washington's offensive line, the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line, by the way, is going to have their hands full with these two defensive tackles. Of course, you got to start with T'Vondre Sweat. 42 tackles, 8 tackles for loss this season. Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. Won the Outland Trophy as the top interior lineman in all of college football. I can't believe I'm saying this. But you take a step down to Byron Murphy. You see the Defensive Lineman of the Year in the Big 12. 26 tackles. 8 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Those are impressive numbers coming from the defensive tackle spot, where sometimes those guys can be more of defenders and big bodies that kind of plug the run a little bit, and maybe they don't get as much statistics in terms of those getting into the backfield stats, those TFLs and those sacks. But these guys have been problems all year long, and these are unlike guys that this great Washington offensive line has ever seen, because guys like this don't really exist at a lot of other college football programs. So what does Washington have to do to combat this defensive duo? I think you're going to see some double teams up front. It would not surprise me, whether it's the run game, run blocking, or whether it's pass blocking, whether you see a lot of focus on these guys. Now, when that does happen, especially with these guys being in the interior, when that happens, I think it opens things up on the exterior of the line. I think that opens things up on the edge spot. This is a Texas defense. Not only these two guys, but this whole defense and this front seven, which is the strong point of this Texas defense. This is a Longhorns pass rush that has 8 players with 2 or more sacks this season. So it can come from multiple guys. It can come from multiple spots. The Horns as a whole have tallied 32 sacks this season. The same number as the Michigan pass rush. We categorize Michigan as a pretty darn good pass rush. I think we got to put Texas in that same category. Washington's great offensive line. I think a big reason why they won the Joe Moore Award as the best offensive line in college football is because of pass protection. Washington has only allowed 11 sacks this season. That's the 4th least amount of sacks given up in all of college football. I think this is a big-time matchup. I almost think this is the matchup. We know what Quinn Ewers can do, and we know what the Horns have on the perimeter. We know, and we're going to talk about Michael Penix Jr. and what they have on the perimeter as well. We've seen it all year long. Both of these teams have put up some big-time numbers on the offensive side, so you got to really dive into some of these bigger matchups. And Texas has an opportunity, right? If these dogs can be let out of the cage, so to speak, and they're able to make Michael Penix uncomfortable, and maybe if the attention is more focused on them and they get even more guys involved in pinning their ears back and coming after the passer, then maybe that could be advantage Texas. That, I believe, is going to be a big-time matchup that isn't quarterbacks, that isn't wide receivers, that isn't running backs. The interior, right? In Big Ten country, we love talking about our linemen. We love talking about the trenches. But I think this is a matchup that we seriously need to talk about as something that could determine and sway this game possibly one way or another. That's kind of talked about the effects that these two guys could have on the pass game. I think you got to talk about the run game as well. I think it's going to be very difficult for Washington to run the football in this game because of these two big bodies up front and what they can do shedding blocks. I think Washington's going to have to throw to maybe set up the run, maybe soften up this defensive line, soften up this front seven. They might have to get a little bit more creative and look to those runs off tackle, right, to avoid these kind of bigger bodies up front. I don't know if Washington is going to be able to do what they did against Oregon. Line up, let these guys road grade, and let Dylan Johnson go nuts and really allow them to have some big-time balance on offense. Balance is very key for Washington. I think the Huskies' run game eases things up in terms of defenses allowing to pin their ears back consistently and come after the passer. Maybe some misdirection, maybe some confusion possibly in the run game. Let's see what Ryan Grubb can dial up in terms of his creativity to possibly neutralize these big-time weapons up front. I can't wait to see where that matchup goes between a really good Husky offensive line and a really good Texas defensive line. Points, points, points. We know New Orleans love to party. It is going to be a points party in the Big Easy. And when you talk about offense and when you talk about points, I think in this one, you got to start what I believe is the better offense. And statistically, they are the better offense. And that, of course, is the Washington Huskies. Of course, it all starts with Michael Penix Jr. You kind of connect this point to the first point I made. If he can stay upright, if he can go through his progressions and he has time, things are going to go great. But I think it's when those two big boys up front wreak havoc where things could maybe get a little bit off schedule for the Washington Huskies. Can Texas just wear green and yellow with wings on their helmet? Because when Michael Penix Jr. plays Oregon, he lights the world on fire. 319 yards against Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. Combined this season, the regular season game and then that championship game, 621 yards, 5 touchdowns against the Ducks this season. Michael Penix Jr. got to bring that big game attitude, right? He's delivered in big games this season. When they were going back and forth with USC, he was able to have a good game, and that Washington offense was really able to get going as well. But here's the thing about Washington. You throw out Michael Penix Jr., you throw out Rome Odunze, you throw out Jalen Polk, who's a 1,000-yard receiver as well, and that alone is a difficult matchup for a Texas secondary that is 93rd in the country against the pass. But now you throw in Jalen McMillan, who some people thought was the best receiver on this team coming into this season. He's been banged up for a lot of this year. But if the Pac-12 championship game proved anything, it means he is back to becoming a key, maybe the key, in this Washington pass game. 9 catches, 131 yards against the Ducks. So now you got Rome Odunze, statistically one of the best wide receivers in college football. You got Jalen Polk, who had quadruple digits. Easy for me to say, quadruple digits in receiving yards this season. Oh, and then you bring back one of the best receivers talent-wise in college football in Jalen McMillan. That's why the pass rush is so important for the Texas Longhorns, because they have a big-time matchup disadvantage with their defensive backs going up against these Washington wide receivers. Washington, they can tear it up. They can light it up. Michael Penix could go for 300, 350, 400 against this Texas defense if he gets time to throw, and if these receivers are able to do what they've been doing all season long, let their routes develop, hit that deep ball, hit the medium, hit the short, run after the catch. They can do almost anything in terms of a passing offense, but they're not the only offense. Washington is not the only offense that can do some things. Texas can do some things as well. Quinn Ewers is possibly coming off the best game of his college career. 452 yards and 4 touchdowns in the Big 12 title game against Oklahoma State. Now, there's one player that really stands out to me. Washington needs to wrap this guy up in space. Xavier Worthy. Watch him in the Big 12 championship game. Watch a little bit of film on some of his other games and other good and big performances throughout the season. When this guy gets the ball in space and he's got 3-yard separation, he's got 4-yard separation, something like that. When he has the ball in his hands, he can create. He can turn a 7 to 8 yard slant route into a 70 or an 80-yard touchdown. Xavier Worthy is extremely dangerous. So Washington, wrap up, tackle in space when Xavier has the football. I'm very curious to see the matchups with Jatavian Sanders. He's one of the best tight ends in all of college football. Linebackers, safeties. This is a Washington pass defense that is 120th in the country out of 133 teams. Now, you got to put some context behind it. This is a Washington defense that has faced the Oregon Ducks passing offense, second in the country in throwing the ball. Bo Nix, right? We all know what they can do. They faced them twice. USC and Caleb Williams had a really good game against them. But maybe they're ready for it. Maybe because of that and the offenses and quarterbacks that Washington faced throughout the season, and that all of this time to prepare, maybe they can put that all together and be ready for what Quinn Ewers and Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell and Brooks in the running back position. Maybe they can use that to put it all together to really combat what Texas is doing. Will that happen? I lean towards the side of no. I lean towards that this game is going to continuously go back and forth and back and forth. I almost looked back earlier to the season when Washington played USC at the Coliseum. That game was going back and forth and back and forth. It was a couple of stops late in the game in the fourth quarter that allowed Washington to get the road win on that particular Saturday night. I think that's what this game could come down to. Who can make the key stops? Who can tip a ball and create a turnover with an interception? Who can punch the football out and force a fumble? It could just be that one turnover, that one stop, that second stop late in the game that could determine which way this one ends up going. You know, when I really look at this game a little bit more, I think Washington on the offensive side of the football is just a little bit better at a lot of the positions. I think Michael Penix Jr., right? Well, we talked about it. When he's upright and things are going well, I think Michael Penix Jr. is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I think he's just a little bit better than Quinn Ewers. Some might say a lot better. Offensive line, I think that advantage goes to the Huskies as well, what they've been able to do in pass protection. And receivers. Texas has not seen playmakers on the perimeter like Washington, kind of like Texas on their defensive line, for Washington's offensive line, because there isn't a group like this in all of college football. They are a unicorn, Washington's wide receivers are in that way, and I think that makes it extremely difficult. Huskies, you need to start fast. I think what you saw in the Pac-12 championship game could be a blueprint to success for the Washington Huskies. You get going, you play from a position of power, you dictate the direction of the game. I think that's where Washington wants to be. If Texas kind of gets going early, their defense gets on the other side of the line of scrimmage and they're dictating things, that doesn't spell good things for the University of Washington. I think this is going to be an outstanding college football game for those that love points, for those that love yards, for those that love future NFL players on the offensive side of the ball. This is your kind of game. Leave your score predictions and your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to see them. I can't wait to see what everybody thinks of this game between the Texas Longhorns and the Washington Huskies. You know what we're cheering for on this channel? We're cheering for a current Big Ten team versus a future Big Ten team in the national championship. So Huskies, let's get there.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.